Always believed that if my marriage ever fell apart, I'd see it coming. I thought infidelity left a trail, missed calls, unexplained absences, the scent of someone else's perfume lingering in the sheets. But sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from the outside. Sometimes it grows like rot within the very walls of your home, slow and silent, until one day, you wake up and realize everything you built has been poisoned. Her name is Emma. We had been married for 12 years. 12 years of love, of struggles, of shared dreams. And if you asked me before this, I would have told you she was my soulmate. The first time I met Ethan, her half-brother, was at our wedding. He was younger than her by 2 years, a product of her father's affair, one that had fractured their family before Emma was even born. He had always been a presence in her life, but distant, an obligation, she once called him. He lived in another state back then, and their contact was sporadic, birthday calls, occasional visits, nothing significant. Or so I thought. Started 5 years ago, though I wouldn't know that until much later. At the time, all I noticed were the small things. Emma began texting more often, her phone always close to her side. She was distant sometimes, zoning out in the middle of conversations, smiling at nothing when she thought I wasn't looking. But life was busy. We had our jobs, our home, our routines. I didn't press her about it. Maybe I should have. The real shift came when Ethan moved to our city. He had taken a job nearby, and Emma was thrilled. She said she wanted to make up for lost time, to help him feel like he had a real family. I encouraged it. Why wouldn't I? She had grown up feeling isolated, caught between divorced parents, a brother who never fully belonged. It made sense that she wanted to reconnect. First, it was normal. We had him over for dinner, went out as a group. I liked him well enough. He was charismatic, easygoing, always making Emma laugh in a way I hadn't seen in years. If I felt a twinge of jealousy at times, I buried it. It was stupid to feel threatened by her brother. But then, little things started to bother me. Emma and Ethan had inside jokes I wasn't a part of. Conversations would pause when I walked into the room. If I entered while they were talking, they'd glance at each other before changing the subject. When we were together, she was often distracted, checking her phone, texting, always quick to reply when Ethan messaged. She started spending more time with him, too. At first, it was innocent, helping him settle in, decorating his apartment. But soon, she was seeing him multiple times a week. Coffee dates, late-night talks, weekend plans that never included me. When I finally asked about it, she brushed it off. He's my brother. We're just catching up. And I believed her. For the next 5 years, I would keep believing her. Even when the distance between us grew. Even when she pulled away in bed, claiming she was tired. Even when her laughter became reserved for phone calls and text messages instead of our conversations. I believed her, because I couldn't imagine the truth. Not yet. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment I should have known something was wrong. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, not a lipstick-stained collar or an overheard phone call in the dead of night. No, it was something much simpler. It was the way Emma looked at Ethan. I caught it during one of our game nights, something we used to do regularly before life got too busy. Ethan had joined us, along with a few friends, and we were all gathered around the dining table playing a trivia game. The room was filled with laughter, playful teasing, the usual camaraderie of close friends. But then, in a moment of stillness between rounds, I saw her. Emma wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at our friends. She was looking at Ethan, and not in the way a sister should look at her brother. It wasn't an obvious, passionate stare. It was softer, more delicate, like she was memorizing his face, like she was savoring him. Her lips parted slightly, and she blinked slower than usual, the way she used to blink when we first started dating, back when she was still falling in love with me. I should have said something then, should have pulled her aside, demanded to know what the hell was going on. But I didn't, because it made no sense. Emma and Ethan were siblings. Half-siblings, sure, but still siblings. And so I pushed the thought away, buried it deep, told myself I was imagining things. That maybe she was just happy to have him around. That maybe my exhaustion was making me paranoid. But the seed had been planted. And once doubt takes root, it grows. In the following weeks, my world began to shift. It wasn't just the way she looked at him. It was the way she avoided looking at me. Emma had always been affectionate in small ways, brushing her fingers against mine as she passed by, leaning against me on the couch, placing a casual hand on my shoulder when we stood next to each other. But now she was pulling away. At first, it was subtle. She stopped kissing me in the mornings before work, blaming it on rushing out the door. Then she stopped holding my hand when we walked together. And then, the intimacy in our bedroom faded into something rare and mechanical, like an obligation rather than a desire. I convinced myself it was stress. She had been taking on more projects at work, staying late, coming home exhausted. It made sense. But one night, I woke up to find the bed empty. It was past midnight, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I glanced at my phone, no missed calls, no messages. I climbed out of bed and walked through the darkened hallway, my heart beating a little faster than it should have been. And then I heard it, a quiet, hushed voice. Emma's voice. I followed the sound to the living room. The only light came from the glow of her phone screen. She was curled up on the couch, speaking in low whispers, her back turned toward me. I froze, not because she was on the phone in the middle of the night, but because of the way she was laughing. It was soft, intimate, the kind of laughter that made her voice shake slightly, a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. And then, just as I took a step forward, she whispered, "I miss you too." Something inside me twisted violently. She hung up the moment she heard my footsteps, spun around, wide-eyed, her face bathed in the blue light of her phone screen. "Oh," she said, voice light, forced. "You scared me. Who were you talking to?" She hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough. Finally, she smiled. "Ethan." It made sense. It was a perfectly reasonable answer, except it wasn't, because Emma had never once called Ethan this late at night before. And even if she had, why the secrecy? Why the soft voice? The way she smiled at the phone like a teenager with a crush. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand the truth. But something held me back. Fear, maybe. Because if I asked, and if she lied, then I'd know. And once you know, you can't unknow. In the days following that late-night phone call, something inside me began to shift. The world around me no longer felt stable, like I was walking on a frozen lake with cracks forming beneath my feet, unseen but there. I found myself replaying that moment over and over. Emma's soft laughter, the way she clutched her phone, the hesitation before she said Ethan's name. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But that was the thing about suspicion. It doesn't need solid proof to exist. It lingers in the smallest details, in the flicker of an expression, in the shift of a voice. And once it takes root, it poisons everything. I tried to push it down. I wanted to trust her. This was my wife, the woman I had shared my life with for over a decade. The woman who had promised me forever. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was letting paranoia cloud my judgment. But then the photos appeared. It was a Sunday afternoon when I saw them. Emma had left her phone on the kitchen counter, something she rarely did anymore. She was outside in the backyard, watering the garden, humming softly to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. I had no intention of snooping, but then her screen lit up with a notification, a message from Ethan, and below it a preview, a single image. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. It wasn't explicit, nothing inherently damning. Just a photo of Emma sitting on Ethan's couch. She was barefoot, wearing one of those oversized sweaters that barely covered her thighs, her legs tucked beneath her. It was casual, innocent to anyone else, but not to me, because I knew that sweater. It wasn't hers. It was mine, and I had never seen her wear it anywhere but inside our home. Something inside me clicked into place. Something ugly and undeniable. I reached for her phone. It was locked, of course. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then, before I could stop myself, I typed in her passcode. It opened instantly, and then I saw the rest of the photos. There were dozens. Some from weeks ago, some from months ago. Most of them looked harmless at first glance. Emma and Ethan together, laughing, sitting side by side at restaurants, at his apartment, at places I had never been told about. But it wasn't the photos themselves that disturbed me. It was the way they looked at each other. The body language, the closeness, the subtle touches. And then there were the selfies. Emma, lying on his bed, her head resting on his pillow. Emma, wearing one of his hoodies, pulling the collar over her lips. Emma, in dim lighting, her hair messy, eyes half-lidded, the kind of look she used to give me after we made love. My hands were shaking. I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. And then, the final blow, a video. I stared at the thumbnail, my breath catching in my throat. It was Emma, sitting in Ethan's lap, leaning into him, her face buried against his neck, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The angle was just low enough to make it unclear exactly what was happening. But I didn't need clarity. The intimacy was unmistakable. My vision blurred. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick, suffocating. This was no longer paranoia. This was proof. And it had been happening right in front of me for years. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them made sense. None of them mattered. The only thing that mattered now was what I was going to do next. I heard the back door open. Emma walked into the kitchen, her hair damp with mist from the hose, a contented smile on her face. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I kept a secret from her. The moment I placed her phone back onto the counter, a decision solidified in my mind. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because if I did, she would lie. She would twist the truth, make excuses, try to gaslight me into believing I had seen something innocent. Emma was too intelligent, too calculated to break down immediately. If I wanted the truth, all of it, I needed to wait, to watch, to trap her. So I forced myself to act normal. When Emma walked inside, she flashed me a soft smile. The same smile she had given me for 12 years. The same smile I once believed was meant only for me. But now I knew the truth. That smile had been shared, stolen, given to another man, her own brother. She moved to the fridge, grabbing a water bottle, completely unaware of the storm brewing just feet away. How was the garden? I asked, my voice even controlled. She glanced over her shoulder, taking a sip. Good. I think the tomatoes will be ready soon. I nodded. That's great. I wondered if she could hear the venom beneath my words. If she noticed the way my hands gripped the edge of the counter just a little too tightly. But she didn't, because she had no reason to suspect anything. Not yet. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, her body curled under the sheets. I turned my head slightly, watching the rise and fall of her chest, my mind screaming with every possible reaction I could have. I could wake her up right now, grab my phone, shove the pictures and videos in her face, demand an explanation. I could scream, break things, tear this entire house apart. But what would that do? She would cry, she would lie, she would beg, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So instead, I slipped out of bed, moving carefully so I didn't wake her. My pulse hammered as I crept downstairs, my mind operating in ways it never had before. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't a man built for deception or revenge. But tonight I would become one. Because if Emma had spent 5 years lying to me, I needed more than just pictures. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. And I knew exactly where to start. I spent the next week watching her, studying her. Emma had routines, patterns that I had never questioned before. She went to work at the same time every morning. She texted Ethan frequently, but never in front of me. If she took calls, she'd step outside or into the bathroom, laughing softly through the door. And every Tuesday and Thursday, she left the house in the evenings, claiming she was going to yoga. I had never thought twice about it. Until now. So on Thursday, instead of going home after work, I parked 2 blocks away from the yoga studio she supposedly attended. I had never been there myself, but I had driven past it a dozen times. I knew its location. I knew its name. And I knew that when I sat there, watching from my car, Emma never walked inside. She never even showed up. For the next hour, I watched, my stomach twisting tighter with every passing minute. People came and went, yoga mats slung over their shoulders, chatting about class. But Emma was nowhere to be seen. At exactly 7:45 p.m., I got a text from her. Emma, just finished class. Heading home now. Love you, Red Heart. I nearly laughed. She was lying. Boldly. Effortlessly. But where was she really? I needed to know. So I made a decision, one that would change everything. I was going to follow her. On the following Tuesday, I left work early, parked outside our house and waited. At 6:30 p.m., right on schedule, Emma walked out the door wearing her athletic leggings and yoga tank top, a water bottle in hand. She looked the part, played the role, but I wasn't fooled anymore. I stayed far behind as I tailed her, keeping my distance, making sure she didn't spot me. And when she turned left instead of right, when she drove in the opposite direction of the yoga studio, I knew she was going to him. Fury burned through me, but I swallowed it down. Not yet. I kept following. And when her car finally pulled into a quiet residential area, into the parking lot of an apartment complex I had never seen before, my hands clenched so tightly around the wheel that my knuckles turned white. She got out of the car, glancing around briefly, checking. Then she walked up the stairs to the second floor and knocked on his door. Ethan opened it almost instantly, and the way they looked at each other, the way he pulled her inside without hesitation, his hand on the small of her back, that was it. That was the moment everything shattered. I had my proof. Now I just needed my revenge. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was no more than 20 minutes. Time stretched and warped around me, turning seconds into long, painful eternities. I stared at the apartment door where my wife had disappeared, where she was now with him, and I imagined every possible scenario playing out behind those walls. Was she laughing at some inside joke, her fingers trailing along his arm? Was she pressed against him, whispering his name, lost in some disgusting, tangled intimacy that had been growing between them for years? Or worse, was she telling him that she loved him, that she belonged to him more than she ever did to me? I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went numb, my breathing slow and measured, keeping the rage from consuming me. If I stormed inside now, if I banged on that door and ripped it open, what would happen? A confrontation? A fight? Emma would cry, Ethan would try to defend himself, maybe even try to hit me, and it would end in some messy explosion of violence that would solve nothing. No, that wasn't what I wanted. What I needed was something permanent. A reckoning. I needed to burn this all down in a way they could never recover from. So I waited. It was almost 9 p.m. when she finally emerged. Her hair slightly disheveled, her expression relaxed, a soft smile lingering on her lips. She looked like she had just come back from something warm, something comforting. There was no guilt on her face, no hesitation in her steps. She had done this before many times, enough for it to feel normal. That was the worst part of all. How effortless it was for her to betray me. She got into her car and drove off, heading home to our house, to our bed, where she would probably curl up next to me and pretend none of this had happened. I let her leave, let her slip back into her carefully woven lie, knowing that by the time I came home, she would already be settled, waiting for me with an easy smile, with soft words and gentle touches that had lost all their meaning. That night, I lay beside her again, just as I had the week before, just as I had every night for years. But this time it was different. The air between us had changed. The weight of truth pressed down on me, but she slept peacefully, unaware of the war raging inside me. I stared at the ceiling, letting the hours pass, my mind working in ways it never had before. The betrayal had reached its peak, but I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was planning. The next morning, I left for work as usual, kissing her on the forehead before heading out the door, playing my part. But instead of going to the office, I made my way to a lawyer's office downtown, a man recommended by a friend of mine who had gone through a particularly ugly divorce. I walked inside, sat across from him, and told him everything. I laid out my suspicions, the photos, the late-night calls, the deception stretching back 5 years. The lawyer listened intently, nodding occasionally, then leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together. He told me the divorce would be easy. Emma wouldn't see it coming, and given the proof I had gathered, I could ensure that she walked away with nothing. No house, no assets, no support. The affair, especially given its nature, would give me every advantage in the proceedings. I asked about exposure, whether there was a way to ensure that everyone knew the truth. Not just Emma's family, but her friends, her co-workers, everyone she had deceived. The lawyer smiled slightly at that and said that while he couldn't legally advise me to cause personal damage beyond the divorce, there were certainly ways to ensure that her reputation suffered. That part was up to me. I left the office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. This was how I would do it. Not with rage, not with fists or screaming accusations, but with precision, with patience. I would dismantle her life just as she had dismantled our marriage, brick by brick, lie by lie. The next step was Ethan. I needed to learn everything I could about him, the places he worked, the people he knew, every weak spot in his life that I could target. If he thought he could steal years from me, I would take something far worse from him. I spent the next few days gathering information. Social media, old messages, even casual conversations Emma and I had about him over the years. I found his employer, his past relationships, even some financial struggles he had been dealing with. And slowly, a picture formed. A man who wasn't nearly as invincible as he thought he was. Emma continued as if nothing was wrong, as if she wasn't sleeping with another man and coming home to a husband who knew everything. She laughed over dinner, sent me loving texts during the day, even made plans for our anniversary, completely oblivious to the storm about to crash down on her. I looked at her and no longer saw the woman I married. I saw a stranger wearing her face, a ghost of someone I used to love. But soon she would see me differently too, because this wasn't just a betrayal. This was war. The days following my meeting with the lawyer were filled with quiet, methodical planning. Emma was still moving through life blissfully unaware, smiling at me in the mornings, sending playful texts in the afternoons, and coming home to our house as if she weren't betraying everything we had built. It disgusted me how easily she slipped between her two lives, as if she had mastered the art of deception so well that even she believed it. But her time was running out. The first step in my plan was exposing Ethan. I knew that before I could take Emma down, I needed to ensure he had no place to run, no foundation left to stand on. I started with his job. Through social media and casual online searches, I had already learned that Ethan worked for a small yet well-known marketing firm in the city. He wasn't particularly high-ranking, but he had built a reputation there, one of reliability, charm, and professionalism. I was going to destroy that. I gathered every compromising photo I had found on Emma's phone, every text message that hinted at something inappropriate, every screenshot that painted their relationship in a light that no company could ignore. And then, I drafted an anonymous email to Ethan's employer. I didn't go for accusations. I didn't use emotional language. I made it clinical, factual. To whom it may concern, I am writing to inform you that one of your employees, Ethan last name, has been involved in a relationship that may compromise the integrity of your company's professional standards. Attached, you will find evidence of said relationship, which I believe warrants further scrutiny. I trust that your organization values its reputation and will take appropriate action. I attached everything, and then, with a single click, I sent it. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. Now all I had to do was wait. The next strike came a few days later. I had spent time compiling a detailed message to Emma's closest friends, the ones she confided in, the ones who had no idea she had been carrying on a 5-year affair with her half-brother. The message was simple. You deserve to know the truth about Emma. I trusted her for years, and she betrayed me in the worst way possible. If you consider her a friend, ask her about Ethan. Ask her what she's been hiding. And if you need proof, I have more than enough to share. I sent it to 7 of them. By the time I got home that evening, the bomb had already detonated. Emma was sitting at the dining table, her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I could feel the tension radiating from her body, thick and suffocating. "Something wrong?" I asked, my voice calm, almost amused. She finally lifted her gaze, her eyes slightly red, as if she had spent the last hour on the verge of breaking. "My friends," she said quietly, "are asking me things I don't understand." I nodded, setting my bag down. "Like what?" She swallowed, gripping her phone tighter. "Like if I've been cheating on you. Like if there's something going on between me and Ethan." The words left her lips with hesitation, like she was testing me, trying to gauge my reaction. I sat down across from her, resting my elbows on the table. "And what did you tell them?" Emma's breath hitched slightly. "That it's ridiculous. That I would never—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "That I don't know why they would even ask." She was still lying. Even with the walls closing in, she was still trying to wriggle her way out of it. I studied her, the way her fingers trembled slightly against the smooth surface of her phone, the way her throat moved as she swallowed back whatever emotions were threatening to surface. She was scared. Good. But she wasn't broken yet. And that meant I wasn't finished. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my own phone, and slid it across the table toward her. "Maybe this will help you understand." She hesitated before picking it up, her brows furrowing as she looked at the screen. And then she paled, because staring back at her was one of the photos from Ethan's apartment. The one of her sitting in his lap, her arms wrapped around his neck, her lips grazing his skin. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. Where do you think?" I interrupted. My voice was quiet, deadly. "You're not as careful as you think, Emma." She stared at the image, her face contorted in something between shock and devastation. But not guilt, not regret, only fear. I leaned in, keeping my voice calm, controlled. "It's over, Emma. Every lie, every excuse, every moment you thought you were getting away with this. It's over. And now you're going to lose everything." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I stood up, taking my phone back, watching as she shrank into herself, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. "Pack a bag," I said as I walked away. "You're not staying here tonight." I didn't need to look back to know that, for the first time in years, Emma finally understood. The reckoning had begun. Emma didn't move for a long time. I could feel her presence behind me as I walked upstairs, the weight of her silence pressing into my back like a physical force. Maybe she thought if she sat there long enough, I'd change my mind. Maybe she believed she could still find a way out of this. She was wrong. When I reached the bedroom, I grabbed an empty duffel bag from the closet and tossed it onto the bed. The room felt different now, like a hollow version of what it once was. The framed wedding photos, the neatly folded blankets, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Every detail of our life together was now just a reminder of what had been rotting beneath the surface for years. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, hesitant. "Please," she finally said, her voice raw, fragile. "Can we just talk?" I didn't turn around. Instead, I opened the closet and started pulling her clothes from the hangers, throwing them into the bag with no care for neatness. The sound of fabric hitting fabric was the only response I gave her. She stepped closer. I don't know how this happened." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. That was the best she could come up with? "You don't know?" My voice was eerily calm. "Let me remind you, then." I turned, grabbing my phone and pulling up the photos. The images flashed across the screen. Emma draped over Ethan, his hands on her waist, their smiles too intimate to be innocent. One after another, the evidence paraded before her, an undeniable truth she could no longer escape. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if she wanted to deny it, to weave one final lie. But there was nothing left to say. Tears welled up, but they did nothing for me. I had spent 5 years living in ignorance, and now I could see her for what she truly was. A coward, a liar, a woman who had chosen deception over love. I tossed my phone onto the bed and resumed packing. She wiped at her face, her breathing uneven. "I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my jaw. But you did. I was lost. Her voice broke, but I didn't care. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was never supposed to. I snapped. I turned to her, eyes burning, fists tight at my sides. You don't accidentally sleep with your own brother for 5 years, Emma. My voice was cold, steady, and final. You chose this. She flinched, but I wasn't done. You lied to me. You looked me in the eyes every day and pretended you loved me while sneaking off to him. My voice dropped lower, lethal. You don't get to play the victim now. She broke. The sob that escaped her lips was raw, painful, as if she had just realized what she had lost. But I wasn't interested in her pain. I wasn't interested in comforting the woman who had shattered my life. I zipped up the bag and shoved it into her hands. Get out. She didn't move at first, staring at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind, waiting for me to soften. I didn't. She turned, moving slowly, her steps hesitant, as if each one brought her closer to the reality she wasn't ready to face. As she reached the door, she paused, gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I loved you, she whispered, voice barely audible. I stared at her, my expression unreadable.
No, Emma.
You loved yourself. And then, without another word, she walked out. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the empty space where she had been, listening to the echo of a life that no longer existed. But I wasn't sad. I wasn't broken. I was free. And now it was Ethan's turn. The house was quiet after Emma left, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the silence of absence, of something unfinished. She was gone, but the wreckage she left behind remained. And so did he, Ethan, the man who had wormed his way into my marriage, the man who had stolen what wasn't his to take. He had moved through my life like a shadow, always there but never quite seen for what he was. But now I saw him clearly, and it was time to finish what I had started. The email I had sent to his employer had already begun working its magic. Through some careful online digging, I found out that his company had launched an internal investigation, and though nothing had been made public yet, rumors had already begun to circulate. I wasn't done. Ethan was active on social media, his accounts filled with curated images of a man who wanted the world to see him as confident, successful, untouchable. He was careful about his public persona, but not careful enough. I gathered every incriminating piece of evidence, the texts, the photos, the timestamps that painted a clear picture of deception. I compiled them into a folder, created a burner account, and sent it all to his entire contact list. His co-workers, his friends, his past relationships, and most importantly, his mother, Emma's stepmother, the woman who had raised him, who had trusted him to be more than the result of an affair. The woman who had once tried to make a broken family whole, only to have her own son shatter it beyond repair. I sent the message. Then I waited. The fallout began within hours. By the next morning, Ethan's social media was in flames. People were tagging him, calling him out, demanding answers. His accounts went dark, but the damage had already been done. Then, a new message landed in my inbox. It was from an unfamiliar number. You bastard. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're going to regret this. You've ruined my life. Ethan. I stared at the words, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my chest. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't admitting anything. He was just angry that he was finally facing consequences. I typed back 2 words. So did I. Then I blocked his number. The final piece came unexpectedly. That evening, as I sat in the house that now felt like a stranger's home, the doorbell rang. I expected Emma, maybe even Ethan. But when I opened the door, I found Emma's stepmother standing there. Her face was tight, her eyes red, but she wasn't crying. She stepped inside without asking, her presence sharp and commanding, as if she was holding back the full force of her anger. She took a deep breath. Is it true? I met her gaze. Yes. She exhaled shakily, nodding as if she had already known but needed to hear it spoken aloud. For how long? 5 years. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture sagged, like a woman who had been holding up a weight she could no longer bear. "I always worried about him," she said finally, voice brittle. "I raised him, but there was always something missing. A selfishness, a disregard for limits. I tried to teach him, but you can't force someone to be decent." She shook her head. "And Emma, God, I never thought she'd—" She trailed off, looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't know what I expected," she murmured, "but I wanted to hear it from you." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Before she left, she turned back, her voice quiet. "I hope you ruin him." Then she was gone. I stood alone in the house, the weight of the past 5 years finally settling. I had set fire to their world, and I wasn't going to look back. The house was empty now.
No, Emma.
No lies, no carefully orchestrated deception clinging to the walls like a poison I hadn't realized was suffocating me for years. It was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of mourning. It was the silence of aftermath. The silence that comes after the fire has burned through everything, leaving behind nothing but scorched earth. Ethan had vanished from social media completely. His company had suspended him pending their internal investigation, and with the weight of the scandal surrounding his name, it was clear he wouldn't be keeping his job much longer. Every professional contact in his network had seen the truth, and even if he escaped this with a shred of credibility, the stain of what he had done would follow him for the rest of his life. But I wasn't done, because Emma still had yet to face me. She had been silent since I had thrown her out.
No texts.
No calls. No desperate pleas for forgiveness or half-hearted attempts at explaining the unexplainable. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't hiding in guilt. She was hiding in general, avoiding the confrontation she knew was inevitable. I wasn't going to let her. I had been tracking her location through our shared accounts, something she had never thought to disable because she had never needed to before. I saw her moving between hotels, never staying in one place for too long. She wasn't at work. She wasn't at friends' houses. She was running, but she couldn't run from this. So I waited for the right moment. And when I saw her return to his apartment, despite everything, despite the public humiliation, despite the fallout, I knew there was no hope left for her. She had made her choice. I was going to make mine. I arrived outside Ethan's apartment complex just before dusk, parking in a spot where I had a clear view of their entrance. I didn't rush. I didn't storm in fist swinging. I had done my damage. Now I wanted to watch them drown in it. It didn't take long before I saw them. Emma stepped outside first, her hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing one of those oversized sweaters she always used to steal from me. I wondered if it was still mine, or if she had traded everything for something new, something tainted. Ethan followed closely behind, his movements tense, shoulders hunched as if he knew the world was watching him now. Maybe he thought he had hit rock bottom already, but I knew better, because when Emma pulled out her phone and saw my message waiting for her, just 2 words, simple and cruel, her body visibly froze. "Look up," she did, and then, across the parking lot, our eyes met. For the first time since I had confronted her, since I had shattered the illusion she had so carefully constructed, she was forced to face me. Her expression flickered between fear, regret, and something else. Something darker, something like dread. Ethan saw me a second later, his face twisted into something ugly, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak, to argue, to defend himself in some pathetic, meaningless way. But I didn't move. I just smiled. Not a kind smile, not a forgiving one. A smile that told them both, without a single word, that I had won, that they had lost. Emma took a step forward, her lips forming my name, but I was already turning away. I had nothing left to say to her, nothing left to give. They had spent 5 years stealing my life, but now I was free, and they were the ones left trapped in the ruin they had created. I drove away from Ethan's apartment without a second glance. I didn't need to watch Emma's reaction, didn't need to hear whatever pathetic words she had been about to say. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left for me to hold on to. Whatever love I had once felt for her had died the moment I discovered the truth. and whatever scraps of our life together remained were nothing more than reminders of my own blindness. The road ahead was open, stretching into the evening horizon, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to relief. I didn't go home right away. The house, despite now being empty of her presence, still carried too many ghosts. So I drove aimlessly through the city, past familiar places, our favorite coffee shop, the bookstore where she used to drag me on lazy Sundays, the little diner where we'd get late-night fries after long road trips. Each place was like a wound, still fresh, still raw. But as I kept driving, those wounds started to feel less painful, less like a tragedy and more like a lesson. Emma had destroyed everything we had built, but she hadn't destroyed me. When I finally returned home, the silence wasn't as heavy as before. The house still felt different, but now it was mine. It wasn't a prison filled with deception anymore. It was the start of something new. I poured myself a drink and sat in the dim light of the living room, letting the weight of everything that had happened settle in. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of revelation and destruction, a series of blows that would have shattered a weaker man. But I had survived, and they hadn't. Ethan had lost his job. The last update I had received from my sources, some mutual acquaintances who were all too happy to share what they knew, was that he had been officially terminated. His company wanted nothing to do with the scandal that had tainted his name. And as for his personal life, that was in shambles too. The people he once called friends had turned on him, repulsed by the nature of his betrayal. And Emma had lost everything. Her family had cut ties with her. Even those who initially tried to defend her had backed away once they saw the undeniable proof of her relationship with Ethan. Her friends had abandoned her, disgusted and ashamed to be associated with her. She had nothing left, and in a way that was the worst punishment of all. The divorce was swift. She didn't fight it. She knew she couldn't. She walked away with nothing, just as I had intended. No house, no financial support, no claim to anything we had built together. I had made sure of that. When the papers were finalized, I received one last message from her. Emma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I'll ever forgive myself. But I did love you in my own way, and I'm sorry that wasn't enough. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. She wasn't my burden anymore. Months passed. The wounds faded. Life moved forward. I moved forward. There were moments when I still felt the echoes of what had happened, flashes of memories that resurfaced unexpectedly. But they didn't hold power over me anymore. They were just reminders of a past life, one that no longer belonged to me. And then, one evening, I found myself back at that little diner, the one where Emma and I used to go after long drives. But this time I was alone, or so I thought. The waitress placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of me, and as I glanced up to thank her, my eyes caught another woman sitting across the restaurant. She was reading a book, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the rim of her glass. She looked up at the same time, and for a brief moment, our gazes met, and she smiled, a simple, warm smile, one that wasn't laced with deception or hidden truths, a real smile. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled back. The end.